Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to our today's session on the topic leveraging Gen AI to enhance customer experience management from innovation to implementation. We'll just give everyone a minute or so to join. But in the meanwhile, for those of you who have joined us, do let us know where you're dialing in from. Drop in a comment highlighting your city or your country, and we'd love to hear where our audience is based out of today. I would also like to use this time to introduce the panel today. So we have folks from the Everest Group team, and then we have a very special guest with us as well. I'll quickly introduce the Everest team first. Starting with me, my name is Sharang Sharma. I'm a vice president with the organization. I look after our research on the customer experience management space, which includes all kind of interesting themes like shoring mix, the sourcing trends in the market, the digital technologies in the CX market, such as conversational AI, Gen AI, and the others, and a lot of other exciting stuff as well. I am also joined by my colleague Shirley today. Shirley, if you don't mind introducing yourself to the audience.
Yes, very happy to be here. I'm a partner within our business process services practice. I look at our research in the area of customer experience management services, as well as some horizontal back office functions, finance and accounting, procurement, supply chain management services. And I've been with Everest Group for about 5.5 years. And I've also had the pleasure of knowing Artie for about 30 years. So I'm so excited by being able to be in this session with Artie. So over to you, Artie. Introduce yourself.
Oh, and thanks, Shirley. Thanks for having me be part of this. I greatly appreciate it. So I'm Artie Merritt. I'm the founder of Reconify. We're an analytics platform for Gen AI to do analytics and optimization. I've been in the conversational AI space for a little over 10 years. I was previously at AWS, where I led the conversational AI partnership initiative. And before that, I had an analytics platform for conversational AI that we grew to about 20,000 customers who processed 90 billion chatbot messages. So seen quite a bit in the space.
That's great. And I just want to clarify, we are very real humans out here. This is not a video that's been created by generative AI. I'm sure you would have read about Sora recently and the kind of hyper realistic videos it can create. We still have our jobs intact for the time being. Right, perfect. All right, let's get started on this interesting discussion. But for our audience, those of who you are dialing in for the first time in any of our events, before we really talk about the implementation piece, I just wanted to spend a little time talking about the potential of Gen AI, specifically in the customer experience management space, and the kind of things it can do. Now, I think generative AI has been out there in the market for what, 16 months now, and there's been a lot of talk about it. I mean, every conversation that you go to, it usually gets brought up. One interesting thing that we've seen is that customer experience management as an area is the one that probably will see, or we expect to see, one of the highest impact because of generative AI, right? And there are a number of good reasons for it. The fact that a lot of low complexity transactional work comes into contact center, which is ripe for intervention by technology such as generative AI, makes it a right case for leveraging Gen AI in contact centers. The fact that there's already a lot of data available in contact center that can be used to train generative AI models and improve them over time, I think that also helps. And then finally, from an enterprise perspective, we're seeing that there's an increasing focus on enhancing customer experience across different digital channels as well as voice, and the fact that there's a pressure to reduce costs as you're trying to do that or optimize costs as you're doing that, both of which generative AI has shown a promise to do really well. So I think all these factors contribute in the excitement around generative AI, specifically for the customer experience management space. In fact, one of the research that we did internally recently, we figured out that with Gen AI, probably you can see as much as 30 to 40% efficiency gains in contact centers alone because of the technology over the period of 3 years, as technology matures, as the adoption increases, and we're able to overcome some of the hurdles. So we're looking at that kind of gains, and it's really promising for generative AI within CXM. But Ati, I'd like to, get your opinion on the fact that we just recently, I would say, recently started with conversational AI in customer experience management. It's not more than a decade old. We were just sort of, getting a hang of it, and then generative AI just comes in, and now we're talking about, how it is the next best thing. So, do you really see generative AI really replacing some of the conversational AI solutions that enterprises are already using out there?
Definitely. Yeah. So personally, really bullish on Gen AI, especially for replacing traditional NLU designs and conversational AI. I think when it was first coming about, like you said, about 16 months or so ago, towards the end of 2022, there was some hesitancy, and folks were trying to figure out how to make use of Gen AI, and more in the traditional models. Like if you folks are familiar with the NLU models, where you create intents and training phrases, they might have been using Gen AI to help build those models, or maybe augment the training phrases. Um, and I think some of the folks that had platforms in this space maybe were downplaying Gen AI initially, but that might have been because they were so focused on the older way of doing things. Um, but now you see uh, just about all the top platforms have included Gen AI as an option, and it does really make things a lot easier to develop, and it makes for a better user experience because it improves the understanding of what the user's trying to do or ask. You can understand that better, and that can lead to higher customer satisfaction. So we're definitely seeing that move to Gen AI, not just for chatbots, but for other solutions too, like the agent assist and call summarization.
No, absolutely makes sense.
Yeah.
A lot of the way we've seen some of the demos out there. I think the intent recognition capabilities of generative AI is really on another level when you compare to some of the older technology out there. So we're in for exciting times, and like the pop-up says, if you have a question, so we have a dedicated time towards the end where we'll be taking on questions from the audience. But if you do have a question, please drop it in the comments, and we'll take it as soon as we can. Right. So moving on, I think then question really becomes about how do you really deploy it, right? We've seen that there's a lot of potential and the great things that generative AI can do. But when it comes to real life deployment or use cases, surely I'd invite you to share any experience of what you're seeing out there in the market. Have you seen companies deploying Gen AI already, or is it still a conceptual sort of thought at the moment?
Yeah, I definitely am seeing the space, developments in the space move very, very fast. In many, many cases, there's been solutions that are being moving rapidly from pilot and proof of concept to implementation. However, on a scaled basis, I think that's still pending, but I do think that that's coming very, very soon. Where we do see more focus for the time being is in areas of such as agent assist, because it can really help agents become a lot more efficient and effective, give them the support that they need to deliver better customer experience, while at the same time manage some of the risks that might come from you know um, uh, perhaps the inaccuracy that might come out of a nascent, still a somewhat nascent technology. I recall actually some of the examples that Artie had been sharing with us on some of the very funny ways that generative AI can kind of get it wrong. And so when you actually do the agent assist and implement it from that standpoint, you still have a human, available to make those kind of value judgments, and you're not exposing your brand to some of those reputational risks that come from having silly answers, or actually even answering something wrong, and therefore being held accountable for that wrong answer. And I think we've all seen some recent headlines, around that, right?
Definitely, I think the two most recent examples that come to my mind are just this year. I think a couple of weeks back, where the Air Canada chatbot got it wrong. Some policy around the bereavement fares for the consumer, even though it was very clearly stated in the FAQ. the chatbot, given that generative AI is still probabilistic in nature, got it wrong. They got off easy because the fine was just $800, right? It could have been much worse, but that just shows you the kind of risks that come with making generative AI, live for the audience or for the end consumers rather than testing it internally. The other example that I remember is that of Chevrolet dealership where the chatbot promised to sell the car to the customer for $1. I mean, that would be great. We'd all love a car for $1, but let's be honest, that would make the companies go bankrupt. So I think those are the kind of things that you need to be cautious about before we talk about implementation for end users. Now, the other thing that I also wanted to discuss was the fact that we're seeing interest across the board. Like I said, these two examples that I recently quoted, that I just quoted, they were from different industries. And when I look at some of the other industries as well, I mean, I am really surprised to see that there's an all-round enthusiasm and excitement. Definitely, there are industries like technology, retail, travel and hospitality where there's a lot of excitement, there are pilot projects going on, but equally so we also had a lot of innovative work going on industries like healthcare, energy and utilities, telecom, or even banking and financial services for that matter. Yes, there are regulation, there are risks, but still I think given the huge potential of this technology, everybody wants to get on board and see how they can fit it into their into their ecosystem. But I think given the huge excitement, there has to be some underlying reason for it as well, right? And Artie, what do you think? How is generative AI really affecting the quality of customer experience from an consumer perspective? Of course, how do you see that playing out?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I ran a survey a little over a year ago, and we just about folks how they felt about customer service, whether it was chatbots or talking to a live person. And some of the stats that came out that 90% of people would do business again with a company based on a positive customer experience. 70% would be willing to pay more for a product if that company provided exceptional service, and then at the same time, 64% would stop doing business after just one bad experience. So all this comes down to customer satisfaction, providing a better customer experience. And two other things the survey showed was that understanding, the ability to understand and respond accurately were the top things folks were looking for, like 88 to 89%. So what generative AI does is help with that accuracy of understanding. So especially with like more complex type questions, or like a question that might have multiple parts, or even what we start to see in different regions, like multi-language, it could be like people mix the languages, all in the same question. So being able to understand the intent, pull that out from that is quite impressive with Gen AI. So that already helps right there, improving that understanding. And then for the accuracy or the response, well, now instead of hitting a fallback, like if you ask a chatbot something and it doesn't understand, instead of getting that, I don't know what you're asking me, I'm not set up to handle that. Well, now you can use Gen AI to run through those FAQs, your knowledge base, whatever it is, to provide an answer back to help that customer out. So I think all these definitely help provide that better customer experience.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, being a bilingual myself, I know how frequently I tend to mix my languages when I'm chatting with an agent, and it's so great when technology can understand so seamlessly transition between both the languages. I think that's a really elevated customer experience that makes you as a customer really happy. Now, the other thing that we have seen is that the whole conversation around Gen AI, what it has done is it's supercharged the agenda that enterprises have had around digital transformation or digital CX solutions, right? I just wanted to check with you if you've seen out there any kind of acceleration in the development of digital CX solutions uh, because of generative AI. Are there any other solutions that are now becoming more advanced, more efficient because of generative AI? How is it panning out?
Yeah, so I think what Shirley was mentioning, like the agent assist, is one area where this could make things much more efficient. Like if a call comes in, say it's a IVR type solution, like call comes in, you could be translating this in real time, running it through Gen AI to help provide answers to an agent. That definitely helps speed things up and also provides a more accurate answer. And then on the development side, things have changed quite a bit, where instead of having to create these NLU models and come up with the intents and the training phrases, that's one of the hardest things people have trouble with. So I had a customer who's a quite popular pizza delivery company, the worldwide pizza delivery company. They had a conversational AI experience across 7 different platforms like chat and voice and all this stuff. And you'd think they knew how people ordered pizza, but then once they went live and we saw the analytics, they were missing stuff left and right. Like, so with uh, because of those, having to create those intents and training phrases. Now with Gen AI, you don't have to do that, and it can pick out these, um, more complex or different ways people say things to better understand. Um, so that's helping improve that part of the development, and then um, the maintenance of that too all starts to get improved. So I think that's one of the areas where we see quite a bit of improvement.
Got it. No,
Yeah.
I wonder if the solution that the pizza company leveraged, if they have an opinion about pineapples on pizza, I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
that should divide the internet, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, exactly. Yeah, the funny thing with that, with that particular one was things that people don't didn't recognize. Like we were chatting earlier before the call started about having emojis in your posts and all that kind of stuff. But in some of these chat messaging, folks, people do communicate with emojis too, and so folks often don't understand that when they're building their chatbot experiences. So what was happening with that particular chatbot is the thumbs up actually broke their chatbot. So someone would go through the process
Interesting.
of like ordering a pizza, they get all excited, and then they do the thumbs up when they're done, and bam, that kills the order. So looking at that kind of stuff and being able to figure out, well, that means something, the person's happy, and taking that into account.
Makes sense. I mean, and I'd be curious to understand from our audience if there's any kind of generative AI solution that they're currently leveraging and what are the kind of use cases that they're looking at. So feel free to drop in your comments around, or even if you're considering something or testing it in pilot, do let us know. We'd love to hear from our audience what's the kind of adoption that you have for this technology in your environment. And I see a couple of good questions coming in. We plan to take them up soon. Uh, but for now, moving on, I think then the real question becomes about, how do you really go about implementing it? It's not going to be as simple as, hey, let's switch or flip a button and there you have, bam, my magic assistant doing everything for me. So I think what's important is to have a framework. Even as enterprises look at their journey, they need to prepare, do their homework beforehand before they can look at implementing generative AI in a successful way. And emphasis on successful, because you can go out today, be a risk taker, and deploy generative AI in your environment, but there's a lot of lawsuits or there could be a lot of liabilities that could potentially happen. And of course, we not want that. So I think as we talk about this framework or roadmap for adoption, there are a couple of components that we see are critical for assessment before you really start deploying it in real world scenarios. Starting with the fact is understanding what generative AI can do and what are the current limitations. I mean, if you want a butler that gets you breakfast in bed, probably generative AI is not the right tool. But even in customer experience management, as I look at it, there are certain things that generative AI does really well. Like Shirley mentioned, some of the things around the agent assist capabilities, answering some of the less complex inquiries, monitoring the performance of agents. So those are the kind of capabilities where it really shines. And there are going to be some limitations where it might not do such a great job. So I think for enterprises, the first and foremost important criteria is to understand the limitations and the strengths of the technology and how do they fit in into their own environment. I think what is important to also understand is that Gen AI cannot completely replace human agents at the moment, at least. So how do you really create an environment where both these sides of the equation, the human side and the technology side, are working together to create a more uh, superior experience for the customers, where you're streamlining the processes, making things more efficient. So understanding all of that is critical. Next, then I think it also becomes important to understand how do you really go about identifying the use cases? We spoke about a couple of use cases, but what is the process that one should deploy to identify these use cases? Surely I'd invite you to share your thoughts on what would be a best strategy for enterprises here.
I mean, obviously, when you're implementing technologies, you're really trying to find a solution to some problems or pain points that you're trying to solve for. So, having a good mapping and understanding of where those pain points and challenges or inefficiencies are is obviously the first step. And then engaging with stakeholders to validate those applications, develop a business case. One of the things that we are seeing actually quite often, because generative AI is at the beginning stages of the cost curve, which means that it's actually fairly expensive. And a lot of times when you are trying to validate whether generative AI is the best solution for your problem, we are seeing quite often that there could be other technology solutions that would be more appropriate, more cost effective, and in some ways that's actually accelerating the overall digital transformation journey, and not just in terms of generative AI. So I was participating in one of these conferences and talking about generative AI, but this time in a F&A space, and a pretty advanced technology company. They were talking about their example and their experience, and it turned out that it was automation. It was RPA. It wasn't generative AI at all. But they're just so excited, actually, that the executive attention and openness to invest in technology has now created an ability for them to potentially pursue other tech
Right.
solutions, even if it's not generative AI, right? So we are going to see an acceleration, not just in terms of the maturity levels of generative AI, but also increasing adoption of other tech solutions to address those pain points and problems.
Yeah, right. Like you said, it's about solving for those real world challenges. And it doesn't always have to be generative AI. In some cases, maybe the more primitive, comparatively, I mean, of course, technology might do wonders for you at a much lower cost. So it's important to understand. I think what generative AI has done has opened up the conversation to leveraging a lot of other digital technologies in contact center environments, which is great. But I think, coming back to the framework that we were talking about, so we've spoken about understanding potential, identifying use cases. The next one is probably going to be selecting the right technology. And Ade, I mean, you've been in this area, working in this area for a while. There are so many LLMs out there. Some of them are open source, others are from the likes of Microsoft and Google's. So as an enterprise, what would your advice be? How do I go about picking the right LLM solution?
Yeah, definitely. There are so many to choose from, and they keep, more keep coming out, and they keep improving, and all. So it can be challenging. So it's definitely important to experiment a little bit here. But some of the key factors that folks look at are the costs, latency to an extent, and the accuracy, especially around hallucinations, which I'll mention in a second. And actually, the big one is really data rights and the data privacy. We've heard of cases like there's a Samsung one where some folks submitted, they're using it for code generation. They submitted proprietary code into it. So that code now becomes part of OpenAI. So that's for a larger enterprise, that data security is huge. So that's why, like, Microsoft and others. So Microsoft has a private instance of OpenAI and Azure for customers there. Other platforms are doing similar things, or folks are, say using Meta Llama, where they can run all locally themselves. So data privacy is definitely a big thing to keep in mind. The accuracy and hallucinations is something too. There's some things you can do to try to reduce that. Like, it's definitely a hard problem to solve, but through prompt engineering, that can help a little bit, basically setting up guardrails for filtering the types of prompts going in or the responses going back out. making use of some of the different technologies like fine-tuning a model, or what folks refer to as RAG, where you're kind of focused on a particular set of content that can help reduce those hallucinations. And then the costs are really something to keep in mind, because the cost can actually be quite a bit higher than a traditional NLU model. Like you see the pricing, and it's based on tokens. Like when you kind of chunk up the words, you get tokens. Like kind of rule of thumb is every 4 characters, but it depends on the model how they do tokens. But you see it at, it's 1,000th or 10,000th of a cent. That's cheap, but then all of a sudden that really adds up, and you're using prompts for context and all. So there's some things you can do to mitigate that. But the important thing is really to experiment and test these for your particular use case. And we talked about, some of the, Shirley brought it up earlier, there's some funny things that these LLMs, how they respond. And I had a friend who his go-to message was this, to spell lollipop backwards. That's how he tests the different models. And it's funny because you're writing the word lollipop out, and so it has the letters, but then when the models go to respond, they get it all goofed up, like completely different combinations of letters. And then Meta often tries to come up with some strange definition for the new word it made. And I think we had one example where it was with Mistral, where it walked through the steps, but it still got it wrong. It said to spell lollipop backwards, and then it used different letters. And then it said, and that ends up with, and then that was a whole other set of letters. Like it just grounds you a bit that this isn't true, like general artificial intelligence. It's still algorithms and vectors and all that. But these things will get better.
Great. And I'd love to ask the audience here, for your generative AI implementations, do let us know in the comments what are the kind of LLM models that you're looking at. Even if you don't have a name, maybe if you could just let us know if you're looking at open source models or the ones from the likes of Microsoft's and Google's of the world. Do share that in the comments below as well. Right. Moving back to the framework, because that is sort of the focus of discussion. Once you've sort of done or selected an LLM, how do you really analyze the impact? Uh, Adi, I'd love to hear from you. How do you assess some of the benefits, risks, and ethical implications of deploying generative AI, and what should be the strategy around that?
Yeah, definitely. Like if we go back to the beginning, where this is all about customer satisfaction, providing a better customer experience. This is why I'm really bullish on Gen AI. It does help with that, for providing that better experience, understanding users better, responding more, so reducing those fallback, I don't know type messages. And there's things you can do to mitigate some of the risks or concerns folks have, not just with the guardrails I was talking about, or fine-tuning models and having it focused on your content. But you don't actually have to have the Gen AI necessarily respond to the user. You can use it just for that intent detection. So, figure out what the person's intent is, respond in code, like JSON code, to the chatbot, and then the developers can still program what the response is. So those are some ways to mitigate. I do believe it makes things a lot faster to build and deploy. I was blown away the first time playing around with ChatGPT, just experimenting with, was talking about the NLU models, where before that was quite a bit of a challenge for folks. But you can go in and say, create me you're a travel assistant, create the model for common travel related questions, and it builds it for you, right? Like, and obviously you can go then fix it up there, but it just speeds things up. But yeah, some of the things to reduce risk are things around the guardrails, using RAG, fine-tuning models, prompt engineering. The other thing folks might need to keep in mind is, if you're using this for coding, like you can actually code with Gen AI, it's pretty impressive. But just keep in mind some of the copyright. It goes back to these data right issues, copyright and concerns, because you could potentially be violating someone else's license because it's pulling in code from theirs, or you might not be able to copyright your own code. Like in the US, apparently you can't copyright or patent code that's machine generated. So it's something to keep in mind. And the last thing I just mentioned is there's still a need, and it's really important to still have conversation designers involved in these flows, because those are the folks that will make for that empathetic, unbiased kind of flow, like helping keep people on the happy path, being intuitive, and you need those conversation designers for that a bit. So you can use Gen AI for figuring out what the user wants, helping come up with answers. But I think having the conversation designers that can help make that a more intuitive flow is helpful to have involved too.
Sure. Got it. And then I think the next important thing then becomes is having that kind of internal preparedness as well, right? Technology is all great and it can do all wonders for you, but you need to have certain things already in place within the organization uh, to to be in a position where you can leverage this technology. And the way we see it, at least, is we broadly classify it across three levels of preparedness: across technology and data readiness, people readiness, and process readiness. Now, technology gets spoken about the most often, probably, but it's important to equally consider the people and the process aspect of it as well. Within technology, when we talk about what are the things that you make sure you've ticked on your checklist, things like computing power, right? So generative AI ends up consuming a lot of resources during training, during inference. I mean, there's a reason why the Nvidia stock is 2 trillion right now, and I think the fact that it requires so much computing power is probably one of those reasons. You need to make sure that whatever infrastructure that you have, be it cloud based or otherwise, it can scale up rapidly as you ramp up the deployment of generative AI over time. You need to make sure that your data storage and extraction is quick, reliable, and you have high level of quality training data that you can use to train generative AI, to avoid some of the uh, things that RD warned us about earlier. And then of course, like we've been saying, data privacy and security is important. So you need to make sure that even if you're deploying Gen AI, you are doing it in a way that is compliant, that you're making sure that the customer's data stays private where it needs to, and there's enough security around it, right? On the people readiness side, we see that there's got to be a need for all kinds of engineers, be it AI, ML engineers, data scientists, or software developers. And these will be for multiple of good reasons, right? On one hand, you want to fine tune the generative AI model, make sure that it continues to evolve over time. It can leverage the data that you already have internally in the organization well. And then you also want software engineers to make sure that your generative AI solution speaks well to the existing solutions that are there in the ecosystem. Could be some of the other cutting edge solutions, or in many cases it could be some of the older systems. But you need to make sure that generative AI is able to interact and seamlessly transfer data across all of these rather easily and quickly, and in a cost effective way as well. Finally, the software aspect, the process readiness is also as crucial as the other two, where enterprises need to have that kind of change management policy internally and assess the kind of impact it will have on the employment. Right, when we talk about things like efficiency gains or automating a lot of work, that means a lot of roles may end up becoming redundant. So how do you transition those roles to some of the other areas, or how do you upskill those people who are in those roles currently to take up some of the more complex work, as the requirement from humans in contact centers also changing? That's going to be important. You need to make sure you're regulatory compliant, especially in industries like BFSI or healthcare, where there's a high scrutiny on some of these things. Of course, technology can go wrong, and it has gone wrong in a lot of cases in the past as well. So having those kind of fail safe or redundancy measures is going to be crucial as well. Like Ati was saying, you need to look at the financial aspects of it as well, the kind of investments that you're making, whether you have that kind of commitment to make it over time. uh, Experience with transformation technology, so not everyone has in the past uh, played around with some of the other technologies in this area, like conversational AI or automation tools. So making sure you're ready for generative AI and the kind of changes it makes, and what is the typical process that you go through as you're deploying these technologies from pilot to full scale deployment. Having that kind of experience can help. And then of course there's going to be some cultural inertia, as there always is with new technologies. So making sure you're having that kind of buy-in from your top management, and you're preparing your people internally to be ready to work with new technology. I think all of that also becomes really important, right? And then I think we have a question as well around how do you measure success, and which is the next thing that we want to talk about as well. Artie, I'd ask you to sort of provide your inputs on how do you measure success when you've deployed a solution out there in the environment?
Yeah, it's a good question because sometimes, especially in the customer service area and with chatbots, folks often sort of get fixated on things like escalation and containment. And I always say, like, you can optimize for 100% containment by just never escalating people, but that would be a horrible customer experience. So there's other KPIs, like folks generally looking at, like, jobs being done, or like, did the person get the answer they needed? But I think if you go back to what I was talking about before, customer satisfaction, was the customer happy? Did they get their answer resolved in that session? Like, sometimes folks look at the concept of channel shifting. Like, I was in the chatbot, then I went to IVR, or I was on the web, went to chatbot, went to IVR. Like, so measuring those kind of things, did the folks actually get the answer, and were they happy with the answer? So it's not just, did the chatbot understand, did it respond appropriately, but did it respond in a way that satisfied the user? So it's helpful to ask folks, did that answer your question? Was that helpful or not? And then look at those metrics to see, how they responded to that. And if, they weren't happy, then go back and see what the issue was. Like, was it not understanding properly? Was the answer not the best thing? So that's stuff to look at. Now that you start to get into LLMs, some of the metrics on, like, the product itself change a bit. So before, with NLU, like the intent-based models, you look at mishandled and unhandled intents. So, where the chatbot kind of broke down, and go back to fix those things. But as you move more and more to Gen AI, and away from those NLU models, you might not have the concept of an intent, but you can do similar things. They call it, it's called, like, semantic clustering, like cluster the user's questions or messages or utterances together semantically based on the meaning, and that'll actually bubble up those key themes and key intents. Um, one of the things that surprised me with looking at different, so I had an analytics platform for, chatbots before, and then talked to folks when I was at AWS, people that were building call center analytics, and they seem to fixate on, like, the numeric things, like, call length and all this escalations, that kind of stuff. But very few actually looked at why the people were calling, or why they were contacting in the chatbot, and that's what's really important. And as I mentioned, you do that semantic clustering, it bubbles up those intents. So maybe there's some issue with your underlying product or service, and that needs to actually be fixed. So those are some of the things I think. Really looking at customer satisfaction, look at the reason why people are reaching out, doing that clustering, and use that information to either improve your product or service, perhaps improve the way the chatbot is handling the responses.
Got it. No, all valuable points. I would say it's important to look at success more holistically rather than looking at very specific instances of what you're doing and what's not working. I think seeing the broader picture always helps. And given that we are almost 40 minutes into the conversation, I just wanted to use the opportunity to let our audience know that we also have a custom extract from one of our reports that we recently did around the topic of generative AI in customer experience management. So that is available for our audience today. You can go ahead and download the extract from the link that has been shared in the chat for everyone. Great. Moving on then, the final leg, I would say, in the whole framework that we're discussing is the fact that how do you measure or how do you look at the ongoing maintenance and governance as well? I think that becomes crucial given how rapidly this technology is evolving. I think it becomes even more crucial then. So surely, what's your view on what would be a best practice for enterprises there?
Honestly, I really don't see that this is all that different from any other kind of implementation of a solution or transformation solution that people take. It's really kind of going back to the basics of ensuring that you have clear policies and guidelines, that You foster transparency, accountability, continuous learning. You make sure that you're monitoring and evaluating the performance regularly, and that's where I do see solutions such as Reconify that Artie has designed as being quite impressive, and it was something that I hadn't seen to date. So, a little plug for you, Artie.
Thank you.
But I think it's important, to be able to ensure that the accuracy, the latency, all of those kinds of components, costs, and so forth, that you're optimizing your the performance, and keeping up to date. I think, Sharon, you mentioned that the regulatory landscape is rapidly evolving. And so just making sure that you're compliant is going to be a challenge moving forward as well. So and there's all kinds of ethical considerations around how AI is developing, how you're using it in a responsible kind of manner, and as it grows and it evolves and it learns and becomes better, there's also all kinds of risks that it will grow and evolve and develop to be all kinds of worse, right? And so how are you going to just ensure that it's heading down a good pathway as opposed to a dangerous one? So it's not rocket science. It's all the typical kinds of things that you would end up wanting to do anyways as you're implementing a solution.
Makes a lot of sense, right? Perfect. So then we move on to the fact, how do you really go about deploying generative AI? Do you do it on your own, or do you do it collaboratively? Which is the best approach? I think both have their merits, and I'll probably take the side, or I'll probably speak a little on the collaborative aspect of it. Uh, so the way we see it, we've been speaking to a lot of enterprises as well. I think one of the questions that we asked recently in one of the surveys that we did with 200 plus global enterprises was, how do you really see about implementing generative AI in your customer experience management? And 76%, which is almost three-fourths, said that they'd want to do it in a collaborative manner with a third party vendor or a partner. And I think there are a lot of good reasons for that as well, right? One, this is such a rapidly evolving space. Every 6 months, it's like you're working with a new technology altogether. I mean, the pace of development, the pace of innovation is so fast that it can be really hard to keep up with it, right? And I think that's where, when you bring in a third party provider, you get access to the expertise that they have. They have dedicated resources who are working in this area. It allows you to take the product faster to the market. You make it more cost efficient. Like I said, there's a constant need for innovation, and if you're just doing it internally for your use case, that could end up costing quite a few $1 million, if not more, right? So you need to make it more cost efficient for you, and making sure that you're at the cutting edge of the technology. Of course, there's going to be some risk mitigation as well, like we have spoken about numerously on several occasions, that generative AI comes with its own set of risks. So maybe working with third party providers can help you mitigate some of those risks. And then, given that some of these third party vendors usually have an eye out for all the regulatory updates that are going on in the market, they make sure that their products are more compliant regulatory, in a regulatory manner, and that helps you stay regulatory compliant as well. So I think there are a couple of merits that I see why an enterprise can consider implementing generative AI. But of course, there's going to be the other side of the coin as well, and not yet. Love to get your opinions on why do you see an enterprise would want to do it on their own.
Yeah, fair enough. So I'm trying to be neutral Switzerland on this, but I was just leading a partner segment at AWS, so definitely see a lot of value in partners for a lot of the reasons you said. The partners can help fill the gaps in product offerings. They provide domain expertise. They can augment your resources, speed time to market. There's a lot of great reasons to work with a partner. And then it kind of comes to the type of partner, like a consulting SI system integrator versus like an ISV platform. So I think there's sometimes what I saw when, especially when I was doing the previous analytics company, there were certain types of companies that would often work with partners, and some that pretty much did the stuff themselves. The ones that did it themselves, it skewed to me. Some of the larger financial services sometimes would build it themselves or use, say, a SI partner to help. And part of it, I think, was that data concerns, data privacy, types of concerns for using an ISV type partner. And then I remember at one time, one of the insurance companies we were working with brought this up, that they said, well, there's all the domain expertise around insurance, and there's the domain expertise around AI, and what should they feel, could the partner help learn all the insurance stuff, or could they learn the AI, and they felt they could learn the AI better. So I still believe that partners are quite helpful and the way to go for a lot of folks, because of those things we talked about, the domain expertise and all. So that could be some of the questions that folks play out. Do you have the resources yourself? Do you want to learn this stuff? Would a partner be able to help speed up the time to market, help educate your own team members, augment your own staff? And there's something that we said, especially in Conversation AI, around the domain expertise, because we saw this, even take Gen AI out. Some folks, when they build their chatbot, they just basically take whatever's on the web. Here's my FAQ or something, throw it in, right? And they're not keeping in mind the best practice of Conversation AI, keeping track of context, personalization, that empathetic, accessible flows, like all those things that someone that has the domain expertise could come in and help. And it all goes back to providing that better customer journey, customer experience. So it's just some of the things to think through. But I would definitely recommend working with partners that can help provide that domain expertise.
Yeah, and I think one of the comments I see here is, and Michael mentions it, that one of the major barriers has been the lift required for enterprises to validate some of these readiness points, the ones that we were speaking about. I think working with a third-party provider can help you do that as well in a fairly quickly or in a timely manner, compared to, let's say, if you were doing it on your own. I think they can bring in that kind of external data points as well to measure successes and give you an idea of where you're going with this entire implementation. Right. So I think then the final thing that I'd love to get your views on is sort of the future outlook, right? Starting with you, Shirley, I just want to understand, where do you see the whole Gen AI and CX going in the near future? What are the kind of expectations that you have?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So when I used to be in consulting, we used to talk about the different time horizons in which we expect various strategies or technologies where they become relevant, right? So usually the time horizons are something like 0 to 2 years. That's immediately something's going to happen, and therefore you need to start working on it now to get prepared for that. Something, maybe 2 to 5 years is it's happening imminently, and if you want to follow a rapid kind of follower strategy, then you need to be prepared to develop an approach. And then 5 years plus is going to be essentially never, because that means that the technology is too difficult to implement. So I'll put in that 5 years plus blockchain, right? Like, I firmly believe that is a never technology solution. There's lots and lots of benefits of it, but it's change management is way too hard. And I really think that there's going to be some technology solution that will help get to those benefits without that level of change management. So going back to generative AI, I actually think that this is the first time in which I've seen a technology innovation be a pull from the market. So a lot of the innovations that we've had before were being done onto you, right? like it's, you weren't asking for it. It's just their companies are doing it to you, and somehow you feel like you need to, work to accept it. Well, in this particular case with generative AI, actually companies are behind the curve, right? People are excited by it. They want to do something with it. And because of that pool, I do think this is one of those situations where it falls in the 0 to 2 year kind of category. And I've been last year when, at the beginning of the surge and peak of interest, I said I really think that the contact center 2 years from now is going to be very different from the contact center then, and I still hold firm to that timeline. Actually, by the end of this year, we're going to see scaled solutions. We're already seeing a lot of pilots and proof of concepts in place. We're going to see the impacts, measurable impacts from generative AI. And I firmly think that this is a technology that is here to stay.
Great.
I don't
I'd
know,
love
Artie, would you agree on that?
Yeah, definitely. I like, and it's only getting better. Like, I was at a
Yeah.
event last week where one of the person said, "Whatever you think of Gen AI right now, this is the worst it is. It's only it keeps getting better. Like, and not that it's bad. It's just it just keeps getting better. Like, they keep putting out new models, improving the models and everything. It's impressive. Like, even like that lollipop example we were showing, like now, like some of them, as you go back, they're slowly starting to get it. Like, not every time, but they're starting to get it. Like, it just, yeah, keeps getting better. It's funny because when we first started talking about doing this event, when if you had asked me like where do I see things going in the future, or what I'd be looking forward to, one is a little bit outside of the customer service space. It was the generative video. Like, I was thinking, like, what could happen with movies and all this. And then look, OpenAI just launched this Sora like a week ago or so. So it's moving that rapidly and quickly. It's exciting times. It reminds me of the early internet days, and the technologies will only get better. One of the areas where I'd like to see some improvements is a bit around the hallucinations. Like, it's a hard problem to solve. Like, are there ways to additional ways to reduce those potentials for inaccuracies? And I think we'll see solutions around that soon. And I'm excited. This year, I think we'll see more folks move to production with Gen AI, and
Yes.
moving more and more away from the older NLU ways of building chatbots. Like, right now, we're in this weird hybrid kind of stage where I think we'll see them switch over to more a full Gen AI solution.
Right, and to your point around the constant innovation, I think for our audience, I would definitely recommend checking out the video around Will Smith eating spaghetti and how that has improved over the period of last 6 to 8 months. In fact, now there's a version of spaghetti eating Will Smith as well that probably has been created using Sora. So I think it's really interesting and exciting to see what technology can do. But no, I'd also love to hear from in the comments around your plans for generative AI, and when do you think, or if there's a timeline around when you're looking to either pilot or take it into production, do mention in the comments. We'd love to understand more about that as well. And with that, I think I'll open the forum up for questions. I see we already have a couple of good questions that we'll be taking up soon, but if you have any other questions, please feel free to mention them in the comments and we'll take as many as we can. Right, I am just going through the list, so please allow me some time. So I think one of the questions was around, one of the news that came out. I think it was only yesterday or the day before that I at least read it, was Klarna and their generative AI capabilities. Where from what I read was, generative AI has been able to do, take over jobs of 700 people, or it can do effective work of 700 people. That has also resulted in some kind of job loss. So, Artie, I don't know if you have some more context around it and what's really going on there.
Yeah, so well, the companies, Klarna, they said that they've already handled about 2.3 million conversations with Gen AI, and so the chatbot using Gen AI is working quite well. So I think that one of the things that came up that and it supports multiple languages and multiple regions. So that's when we talk about like the sort of the ease of development as well as the better customer experience. As before, like folks might have had to use different NLU engines for different regions. Who handled languages better for a particular region or for a particular use case. So that also helps there. I think, I don't know if we quite want to say controversy, but one of the things they mentioned is that it helped do the work of 700 customer service representatives, and coincidentally enough, they had let go 700 customer service representatives. But I think, at least the stuff I was reading was that they were saying that was a bit of a coincidence that the layoff had happened, uh, a bit before. So I guess that's
Yeah, I don't know what to
speaking
make of that.
yeah. But I think that the positive things to take out is how effective Gen AI is in that solution. That if it's doing 2.3 million conversations and it's able to do the work with they assume of that many people, that's really impressive. And for
Got it.
folks that are concerned about, like, I think there was another question even about the roles and stuff. But if with any new technology or any new innovation, there might folks worry about like jobs and all, but it generally opens up the opportunities for new roles and better productivity for folks. So, in the case of like agent assist, those kind of things, well, now the agent can focus on maybe harder problems with where a human actually helps, like being able to talk to someone, a more complex problem, right? Or in the case of chatbot development and all, well, now there's the concept of prompt engineers, like having folks that understand how to design prompts well enough, concise, and help do those guardrails via prompts, or learn how to do fine-tuned models or RAG. So I think it opens up new opportunities for folks, and it frees up other people to take on new responsibilities too. So I try to look at all the positive aspects of this.
Got it. Right. And then the next interesting question that I see on my screen is how can businesses effectively measure the impact and ROI of GenAI implementation on things like customer satisfaction, retention, and overall business perspective? So, any opinion on that?
Yeah, definitely. So as I mentioned before, this all comes down to customer satisfaction, like providing a great customer experience for folks. So it's important to measure that. You can effectively measure a CSAT score in the chatbots. The great part about conversation is people not only say what they want or what they're trying to do, they tell you what they think of it afterwards. And you'll see it in the messages. Like sometimes it's positive, sometimes it's, they're saying something not so positive. So you can analyze those user responses, looking for those that kind of feedback. You can actually proactively ask them, because you're in conversation, just ask them, what did you think of that? And look at that. You can measure sentiment of the messages and the sentiment over time. Those are all things to look at. The other is to set up like goal tracking. What was the purpose of that chatbot, or what was the user's intent? If they were trying to find out the baggage policy, did it actually give them the baggage policy back? Like, so there's different sort of flow tracking to whatever the goal is to measure that kind of stuff. And then it's important to measure the accuracy of these responses too. So that's getting more into the technical side, like looking at the analytics to see what the responses were to the user's questions. Was that the appropriate response? Is it one that actually satisfied the user?
Got it. I'm afraid those are all the questions we can take, given that we are almost at the end of the hour. But of course, if you have any other questions, we'd be happy to take those as well. Please feel free to connect with me, Shirley, or Artie on LinkedIn and share your questions there. We'd definitely get back to you. I'd also thank you so much for the time and for an interesting conversation, and to you too, Artie, for sharing lots of interesting views with our audience. So that's it. And like I mentioned, you can download the custom extract of our report and get back to us with any questions that you may have. With that, we'll be taking your, we'll be wrapping this up. And again, thanks for joining in today.
Thanks thanks for letting me be part of this. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.